Hello, my name is John Liu, the Flow Ninja, and today I want to talk to you about how to read and write from dynamic Excel files with Microsoft Flow or Power Automate. Now, this is a topic I've covered before in a YouTube video called the Definitive Tutorial to Read Excel Files in Microsoft Flow. And many of the things I said in that video still are true. If you have access to Premium using the Info HTTP REST and directly call the Excel file would be quicker. Debatably could be easier, but the Excel connector has also been improved since then. So we can consider today's video an updated version of this definitive tutorial. Today's video does not require any premium connectors, so that may be something that's quite important to you. Okay, let's get started. This is the flow we will go through, and we will start with actually down in the bottom right here. There's this action that I want you all to see, and we'll start there and then we'll come back to how the rest of the flow works. There are two example parts. The left part is just to read. It's to read lots of files, and you'll see all the parameters are variable. And the right hand side is how to write to the file, and you see all the parameters here are also all variable. Okay, so this action has to be successful and that action has to be successful. What's that? That's the length of that, so it's the count of rows. That's just to check we have that reading. Okay, now to get started, we want to look at add rows into table, not that one. We made another one. So pretty much imagine instead of variable files, we're gonna pick, hard code these files. And what we want to do is look at this action and see what kind of output is Microsoft Flow expecting anyway. So we can pop over here and do pick code. And let's have a quick look. So if I just copy this path out, and then the body looks like curly bracket, first, last. That seems to be the body. Okay, the rest of it, there's some sort of hint. The metadata is not real, so there's some sort of hint. Okay, so if we pop over to Notepad, paste it out. So this part is unfamiliar to me. I assume that is to do with the flow action. In fact, these two. I think I assume it's to do with the flow action. But this part, from this part onwards, is quite familiar to me. And that is the syntax of Microsoft Graph. So Microsoft Graph it thinks of online document libraries as well as offline folders as drives. So you have drives as the root, and then you have items pointing to a file. Okay, so if we say start with drive, and we can even look at just a quick test to verify. Take that, but this is a flow function, so we're just gonna do something like this. Let's get rid of that too. You see, that is the document library. Okay, and if we go on further and do items, that gives us the Excel file. Okay, so yeah, when I said this looks familiar, and if I go into workbook and tables, you'll see this is the Microsoft Graph. It will basically step into the Excel table. This is the table. Okay, so Microsoft Graph navigates from file into the inside of the Excel file. That's what Microsoft Graph does. Okay, so that's really the background of what we're looking at. So we're looking at how do we get these three variables. We need the drive, which points to the library, which is a SharePoint library. We need the file, that's the file path to our Excel file within that document library. And thirdly, we need this, which is the table, which is this table. And the table has this ID. So we need this third ID. Tables. That will give us this table. Okay, so your Excel file may have multiple tables, and we got this table ID here. Okay, which is really this bit. And from the table, I guess we could just hit rows. There we go. That's all our rows. Okay, so that's how we read with Microsoft Graph. But to use this in Flow, we need these three variables. We need the library, this, and these are Microsoft Graph IDs. That's why they look kind of strange. Has some funny, like has an exclamation mark in it. The file name looks a bit strange too. And then the GUID for the table, that looks also strange. So three variables we need to get. Okay, now let's put back here. So that's that. Now that's the, what would we call this? This one is called the sample import. Sorry, insert row. Okay, and we can move that one up because that one's purely a sample. We're just gonna stick it right at the end. We don't care about that one. Now we need to figure out how to do all this. Now I am doing this in SharePoint because SharePoint has an action called send HTTP request to SharePoint. So this is an action that let us call many of the APIs that are on SharePoint directly, which will be helpful for us in this case. The first thing I'm going to do is show you how to get the library. We're going to call _API v2.0.drives. Put that in the comment. And what that's going to do is really, that's going to tell our SharePoint to give us all the libraries that are on that site. Now this happens to be my root site. So if I go to Graph Explorer, which is site root, and if I get rid of all this, you see this returns me all the libraries. So I have a folder, and that's the ID. And that's my document library. It's called documents, that's the internal name. The URL is called share documents. So you see in my example, document share documents appear back and forth a few times. This happens to be also the default document library in this site, but in my particular example today, I will not use the root document drive. I will just always treat it as one of the possible libraries in that site. So first, what we're going to do is we're going to ask SharePoint to basically just give us a copy of all the libraries inside the SharePoint site. In SharePoint, in fact, let me show you. If I come to the graph here, and then I do question mark $what if, this asks Microsoft Graph, hey, how are you mapped? What are you actually mapped to? And if you see the URL that Microsoft Graph returns, it says, well, this query request is actually mapped to API v2.0 sites root drives. So that's actually what's being executed. And you can see that this is why we use the send HTTP to SharePoint, because the Microsoft Graph is a proxy onto a SharePoint method which we can access from within Microsoft Flow using the send HTTP to SharePoint, which is a standard action. So a couple of things align to make this work for us. So firstly, get all the drives. Then we're gonna get the output from this, which is the value. Then we're gonna do item bracket name is equal to document name. So that's going to filter this array. Then we're going to do an expression. The expression is the first result of this array. We want to take its ID. Okay, so first brackets the result of this array, question mark ID. Okay, and that's gonna give us the ID of this library. And let's run that. Okay, ignore all the rest. We're just gonna keep running little bits. So the output of the SendHTTP is that big value array, and the top, so the body and then its value, and then that's the array. We feed the array into here, filter by name equals to the documents, so we get a output of 1 library out of, I don't know, about 30. Okay, then we take the ID of that library. So that's the first of the 3 variables. We now have the library, and the library is dynamic. If you want to pick a different library, choose a different name in your filter. You can, if you use different SharePoint site, then just configure the SendHTTP to a different SharePoint site to start with. Okay, so that's one variable. Now the second variable, that's where we have, I wanted to show you 2 ways. So firstly is, let's talk about getting data. Now, say the file we want to get is share documents meteorite. Get folder. I don't think I actually use the get folder. We can use this variable path and ask SharePoint and say, give us the metadata using the path. That will give us this. And then we can, that's the actual file name, so we don't need that too. Then we can actually use here and use just the ID, the unique ID of the file name for getting table. So this is the library, that's a dynamic library that we get from the top. So we can basically pretty much read an Excel table using the library variable, which is the graph ID, and then this ID from the file name. Okay. And then again we need to pull out the first, let's just copy that, put that in here. The Excel table, to read and write to Excel, we must get reference to an Excel table. So the easiest way is to run get tables action on it, give it the file name and the library and the file name. That will give us a list of all the possible tables. Then in this expression, we take the first of this array and grab out its ID. Okay, so it goes like that's the value, which is the array of tables returned. We take the first of it, so the bracket goes around, and then question mark, quote ID. Okay, so that will give us the ID of the first table in this get tables. And then we can run get list rows present in table. Library, that's the file reference, so very similar to this. And then also that's the ID from the table. Now I often see people do like an array, apply to each to go through the tables and pick one out. Yeah, we could, if we don't use apply to each, you can get a much faster flow. So in this case, so if you know your Excel only has one table, you can just use first, take the first one. If you know your Excel has many tables and you want to pick it by its name, then you can use the filter array, similar to this method. So filter the array from your top, filter it to the right name, and then take the first one. Okay? Because you end up with an array of 1, so you still need to kind of say, no, I just want the first one and then get the ID. So same pattern here, getting the first ID and then use that here, and then finally in here we are getting the length of the rows. So that's purely to just calculate how many rows that got returned. Okay, so let's run that again. And I want to show you this side. So the left hand side. We'll come to the right in a minute. So we're getting the file name by path. And you see that's the path that we sent through and the ID that came back. Now the SharePoint ID here is an interesting one. It's actually an encoded version of this. See how the ID is not the same. Okay, and this is where I see a lot of people ask me questions regarding this, that they couldn't get this to work. But you see here, SharePoint's ID says this, okay? Whereas that's not the ID that we want, which is this one. See how that's not this, okay? But for the purpose of get tables, it does work. See this ID that went in? It does work. Even though if you go in and have a look, it's came back with, that's the actual ID. See, that's the actual ID. Even though it sent that in, that's the actual graph ID. So that's the first part, and the second part is that the number of and then we get the first ID out of this array, which is that. Then we feed the library, the file ID, so that's the SharePoint one, and also the table, and that was able to get us the rows, the data. And the count of rows is actually 256. Now, Meteorite actually has a lot of data, and so 256 is actually not all the data. To read all the data, I'll show you how to do it. To read all the data, we hit the backstage settings. You should turn on pagination, so Flow will automatically go and read the next page. And you should put up a limit. You need to put up a limit. At the standard level, 5,000 is your max. If you have premium, you can go all the way to 100,000. You can go all the way up to 100,000. But if you're on the standard tier, you can only go up to 5,000. Okay, but basically Flow will keep reading next page until it gets to 5,000. Now that could be a lot of data. Once you have 5,000 read in Flow, you still have the trouble of having to copy it somewhere else or work with that many rows of data. So you may want to filter the type of rows that you're getting back. And that's using the old data filter here. So I won't cover that, but that's something for you to think about. Let me put back here. Now I don't actually want to read all the pagination because I want to keep this quick to run. For the right hand side, we repeat the same thing with the ID, which would have been, so the left hand side, the Meteorite file is a set file of about 48,000 rows. So we're actually not going to insert into that file. We're going to go to another file called Excel sample. And that's a much smaller sample of about 10 rows only. So firstly, what we want to try, if we were say copying it from what we did before, we want to get the file metadata using a path. In this case, that's my path to the Excel sample, and then get the tables with the ID. Now, many of you would have noticed this if you tried, but if you haven't, if you use the ID here, if I were to say don't use that file, we're going to use the file name path2, yeah, we're going to use the ID, and if we use ID here, okay, so this is the ID from this file. If I run this, you see the right hand side is happy, getting data is happy using the ID, but when we get to add rows into a table, this is not happy. So it does not like this ID. Okay, it wants the old graph file ID. And get table is actually fine, just the next one isn't. So to work around this, we're gonna have to calculate the graph file ID instead of using the get metadata, and that seems to be a just a caveat of the add rows into a table action. Now, what I will note is that maybe last year when I recorded the previous video, get tables also did not work with this SharePoint ID. So potentially this is something that the team is still working on and updating as they go. So you never know, in another 6 months, there might be a newer method, or we might be able to just use the SharePoint item path. Or maybe we could just type this in and it will just work. So we don't know that. I don't know that, but I'm just showing you how the technique could work today. So to get the item ID, we're gonna do a second path, and this is a trick in Microsoft Graph where we could do a kind of a find file by name. And the way we do this is in the graph here, we say once we're in that drive, which is say this one, we go to root, and then we use this colon slash, and we say Excel. Okay, so there is this shortcut format in Microsoft Graph that allows us to reference by the partial URL path. So we're gonna copy that, take it over to Microsoft Flow. So you start with something fairly similar to the top, which is the drives, but do a slash. You want the library, which is this library ID, and then do another slash root. Then this could be your file path sample. So this is relative to the library. So if you have subfolders in the library, you could do like folder 1. You could do something like that, okay? If you use subfolders in the library. But let me just come out of that. So that's gonna get us, and if we look at the graph, that takes us directly to this one file. So this is not an array, it's just one file. And we want the ID of that one file, okay? So we don't need that one. We go down here and we're gonna take, this is a crazy file name. Let's rename this. So this is gonna be called Excel file item file ID. Let's go file ID. Wow, I didn't use the word ID elsewhere. Let's go Excel file. Okay, so this is the ID of our Excel file. This is from our second get SharePoint. So let's move that back up there. So that's the by path. Doesn't really work. We need to get the Excel file ID, and that's the graph ID from it. And just to show you, we can kick this out and then just use the Excel file. Delete that as well and use the Excel file. And then what's this? This is just that's to get the first of the table again. So that's the get table. From Excel. Okay, so that's Excel table. So double check, we have library, we have the that one says Excel table, so that's not correct, and that one says Excel table. Let's do a quick thing. There's a space here that I want to get rid of. Good. And then I must have clicked the wrong file for this. We want the Excel file. So double check here. We have three things. We have the library, the Excel file, and then we have the Excel table. Okay. And the Excel table is from the library and the file. And the file is from this send HTTP to SharePoint with the get by path. Quite a handful. Now, finally, when we're inserting into an Excel table, and because these fields are all dynamic, the flow doesn't have any real way of knowing which columns appear for you. So this is a part where we are actually building the JSON directly. Now, you may find it easier to pick hard code an existing one like so, where the columns appear. So pick out the ones you do, even use expressions here if you need to. And then pop over to pick code and then copy this bit out. Okay, see this? Just copy that and put that in here with the double quotes as well. So the whole thing. So you may find that easier, which is why I kind of keep this around. And we're gonna run this again. So you see it runs smoothly. We get the file, we get the library, we get the file, which looks like this, kind of what we're expecting. And then there is an ID in here. That's the ID to the file. Then pick that file out. Use the library and the file. So see how the get tables could seem to accept both the OneDrive file ID as well as the SharePoint URL ID. So that's the interesting one. And then from there we get the first table. Then we insert the row. So we need the library, the file, and the table, and the JSON of the row that we're adding. And then we're able to write, and that comes back successful. In fact, I keep writing to it, so there's several duplicate items. And if I just quickly pop over to my document library, and you see we've been adding like crazy. In fact, let's add a new one. And rather than call it A and B, we're gonna call it C and D. So that's still gonna be A and B. That's gonna be C and D. And let's jump out the file first. I don't want the file to be locked when we write to it. So let's jump out that file. It's gonna write the file, and if I pop back in here again, and we'll see the C and D, and then another A and B. Okay, so that's what we've been adding. I think that's all I wanted to show. Hopefully this has answered a lot more questions that you may have regarding how to read from dynamic files and also write to dynamic files in Excel and using Microsoft Flow. Like and subscribe to my channel, and I hope I'll see you in the next one. So bye!